Noasolof.
Действительно перекрывается, но бьет по корпусу. Максим Noasolof не переходит на голову, и все.
The drama surrounding Maxim Noasolof doesn't begin with hype or trash talk, because it doesn't need to. It begins the moment the cage door shuts and his opponent realizes, often far too late, that they are standing across from a man built like a wrecking ball and fighting with the intent of ending things quickly. Known to fans simply as Mad Max, Noasolof has carved out a reputation that feels almost mythical in the world of combat sports. His fights rarely linger. They explode, surge forward, and then abruptly end, leaving behind stunned referees, shaken opponents, and audiences trying to process what they just witnessed. There is no wasted motion in his approach, no unnecessary flair. Every strike, every grab, every step forward carries the weight of a man who understands exactly how much damage he can inflict and chooses to unleash it without hesitation. Watching Mad Max fight feels less like observing a sporting contest, and more like witnessing controlled violence distilled into its purest form. His power is obvious, but what makes it frightening is how cleanly it's delivered. He doesn't swing wildly or rely solely on brute force. Instead, his striking is crisp, deliberate, and surprisingly technical for someone of his size. When that technique collides with raw strength, the result is devastation. Opponents don't simply lose to Max. They're overwhelmed, swallowed by pressure, and forced to confront the reality that they are not equipped to survive what's coming. One of the clearest examples of this dynamic came early in his fight against Yeni Spiridov. Yeni walked into that bout brimming with confidence, posturing aggressively, carrying himself as if he were the bigger presence in the cage. For a brief moment, it looked like he believed he could impose his will on Mad Max. That illusion shattered almost immediately. Before Yeni could establish any rhythm or land a single meaningful strike, Max closed the distance. His hand shot out, gripping Yeni by the neck with what can only be described as Hulk-like strength. In an instant, the fight shifted from competition to domination. Yeni was no longer an aggressor. He was cargo. Max manhandled him with alarming ease, dragging him to the ground as if gravity itself favored him. The transition was seamless, almost casual, and once Yeni hit the mat, there was no confusion about how this would end. Max locked in a rear naked choke with ruthless efficiency. There was no scrambling escape, no dramatic resistance. The submission was tight, unforgiving, and final. The applause that followed wasn't just for the finish itself, but for how decisively Max had erased any doubt about who controlled that fight from the opening seconds. Things became far more chaotic when Mad Max faced Jimmy Ambry, a matchup that stood out because it was one of the rare times Max didn't hold a clear size advantage. Both men were true super heavyweights, massive frames colliding with the kind of force that echoes through an arena. From the opening bell, it was clear this wouldn't be a technical chess match. They charged into a full-on slugfest, exchanging heavy shots that would have flattened smaller fighters instantly. The energy was raw, almost reckless, as if both men understood that subtlety had no place here. Jimmy managed to take Max down and secure full mount, a dangerous position against most fighters. He began working ground and pound, testing whether Mad Max could be controlled when pinned beneath another giant. Then came one of the strangest moments of Max's career. In what looked less like a sanctioned bout and more like a street fight reflex, Max headbutted Ambry. It was blatant, illegal, and undeniably dirty. The fight paused as Ambry took time to recover, and when the doctor checked him, there was no visible damage. Still, the tension lingered. This was no longer just about winning. It was about surviving chaos. When the fight restarted, Ambry scored another takedown, but confusion erupted again as he suddenly screamed, claiming Max had bitten him. From a camera angles, it was impossible to tell if a bite actually occurred, but given the earlier headbutt, the accusation didn't feel entirely far-fetched. After yet another restart, the brawl resumed, wild and unrefined. Eventually, Jimmy went for another takedown, but landed awkwardly, injuring his arm badly enough that he couldn't continue. The result went down as a TKO win for Mad Max. It wasn't the cleanest or most satisfying finish, but it fit the theme of that fight perfectly. Messy, brutal, and unforgettable. If anyone doubted that Max's success relied solely on brute strength, his fights with Igor Nitv offered a sharp correction. From the opening moments of their first encounter, Max showcased an arsenal that extended well beyond power. He snapped out kicks with speed and precision, throwing them like a heavyweight taekwondo practitioner rather than a lumbering brawler. The kicks landed with authority, forcing Igor to respect every inch of distance between them. At one point, Max even slipped in a casual feint that looked almost playful, as if he were reminding everyone that he could outthink his opponent just as easily as he could overpower him. But once Max decided he was done showcasing his striking, the tone changed instantly. He closed the distance, wrapped Igor in his signature bear hug, and took him down with ease. From there, it was a brutal display of ground and pound. Each strike carried the sound of impact that makes crowds collectively wince. Igor absorbed punishment until there was no question left for the referee to answer. The stoppage was inevitable, a mercy more than a judgment. Their second meeting was even more merciless. This time, Max wasted no time at all. He took Igor down almost immediately and unleashed a torrent of strikes that felt less like a fight and more like a demonstration. The term guerrilla pounding doesn't feel exaggerated here. It was raw, explosive, and overwhelming. Igor had no opportunity to adjust or adapt. The fight ended as quickly as it began, reinforcing the idea that once Mad Max has solved you once, the sequel is going to be even worse. Perhaps the most disturbing display of Max's strength came against Ardo Shukin, a fight that has become infamous among fans. It began innocently enough, with both men exchanging strikes in the opening seconds. Then something shifted. Max seemed to decide that he had better things to do than trade punches. He stepped in, locked his arms around Ardo, and lifted him clean off the ground. The bear hug that followed looked less like a submission attempt and more like an act of destruction. Max cranked down with such force that it genuinely appeared as though he might rip Ardo's head from his shoulders. The visual alone was shocking, a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked strength can be when paired with intent. It wasn't just a submission, it was a statement. When Mad Max stepped into a boxing match against Denis Ivanov, better known as Big Daddy, the narrative shifted once again. Big Daddy was enormous, a mountain of a man whose sheer mass made every punch a potential fight ender. The early rounds reflected that danger. Both fighters approached cautiously, feeling each other out, understanding that a single mistake could change everything. Big Daddy conserved energy, aware that carrying that much weight demands careful management of the gas tank. Max, ever patient, allowed him to work, subtly encouraging him to expend energy while staying just out of danger. By the second round, Max began to taunt him, prodding at Big Daddy's pride, trying to draw him into throwing harder and faster than he should. It was a calculated risk, but one that paid off. As the fight moved into the third round, exchanges became more frequent, and Max shifted his focus to the body. The change was immediate and devastating. Each body shot chipped away at Big Daddy's durability until the armor finally cracked. A brutal series of punches dropped him for the first time, the knockdown echoing through the arena. By the fourth round, Max smelled blood. He unleashed relentless combinations, mixing head and body shots with surgical cruelty. Big Daddy absorbed more punishment than most could endure, but even giants have limits. Eventually, the referee had seen enough. The fight was stopped, and Max stood victorious once again, having dismantled a massive opponent through patience, strategy, and sheer violence. There are fighters who shouldn't share the cage with someone like Mad Max, and Alexander Zakhoz learned that lesson the hard way. From the opening bell, Max unloaded brutal strikes, overwhelming Alexander almost instantly. The first knockdown came fast, so fast that the referee seemed momentarily confused, pulling Max off as if hoping to give the fight another chance. That mercy lasted only seconds. When they resumed, Max dropped Alexander again almost immediately. This time, the referee allowed him to finish, and the ground and pound that followed was swift and decisive. It was a mismatch exposed in real time. Against Andrei Dragomoretsky, Max showed another side of his mentality. Andrei attempted a spinning back fist early in the fight, missing but clearly striking a nerve. You could see it in Max's posture. The miss didn't amuse him, it offended him. Almost as if to say, "I'll show you what real power looks like." Max responded with savage intent. Low kicks slammed into Andrei's legs, backing him up in fear. When Andrei hit the floor, the punishment intensified. Heavy punches rained down, each one sounding like it could end the fight on its own. The referee stepped in as the crowd reacted to the sheer violence on display. Once again, Max barely looked fatigued. The pattern repeated against Adnan Alek. Early exchanges showed Max's speed, his kicks snapping out with shocking quickness for a man his size. For a moment, it resembled a point kickboxing match. Then, as so often happens, Max decided he was done playing that game. He closed the distance, took Adnan down, and began landing crushing body shots on the ground. The strikes were so piercing that Adnan tapped almost immediately. Another fight, another rapid conclusion. The final chapter in this brutal highlight reel came against Alexander Aleksik. From the opening seconds, Max targeted the legs, chopping them down with ruthless efficiency. Each kick sent Aleksik flying, his base eroding with every impact. When Max followed up with a head kick, it was simply too much. Aleksik went down, and the referee stepped in to save him from further damage. The ending felt inevitable, the culmination of sustained, calculated brutality. This is the reality of Mad Max's career. Fight after fight, opponent after opponent, the story remains largely the same. Once the cage door closes, he brings pressure that few can withstand, blending power, technique, and a willingness to end things decisively. He doesn't just win, he overwhelms, leaving behind moments that linger in the minds of fans long after the final bell. Now the question is yours to answer. Is Mad Max one of the most terrifying power fighters you've ever seen? Or is there someone out there who could truly test him and survive the storm? Which of these finishes stood out to you the most? And who would you like to see him face next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of combat sport's most savage forces, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more high-impact fight breakdowns coming soon.